Final Fantasy VII. Probably one of the most oversaturated games in the franchise, which is why I didn't want to start off with it as the first one. It seems like every time Final Fantasy VII is mentioned in the context of Final Fantasy, it becomes the dominant topic of conversation, despite any opinion of the contrary. I half expect that debate to continue in the making of this video. But nonetheless, I tried my best to give this entry the attention that it deserves. Final Fantasy VII is, without a doubt, the most popular Final Fantasy game of all time. It outpaces all the older titles and most of the newer ones, and is regarded by many fans as the pinnacle of JRPGs, regardless of whether or not the battles are turn-based or more action game-oriented. The story is surprisingly complex. Thanks to the success of Final Fantasy IV, VI, Chrono Trigger, and The Secret of Mana, Square Enix, called Squaresoft at the time, saw great potential in long narrative games over shorter, simpler games like Crash Bandicoot and Tomb Raider, which released around the same time. Final Fantasy VII was released in 1997 with a timeline that actually takes place in the year of 2007, which means that Cloud, Aerith, and Tifa are Millennials. Yep, it's true. Aerith's exact birthday is February 7th, 1985. Cloud was born August 11th, 1986, and Tifa was born May 3rd of 1987.
Aerith's birthday is actually really close to somebody we know.
That makes this picture particularly interesting since the three we're looking at here are Blair, Madeline, and one of the twins. I want to see if you guys can figure out which one. Comment down below. Is this Martin or Shane? Either way, it's interesting because while Blair is the older character in our story, Tifa is the younger. Their ages are kind of flipped. Anyway, that means that these days Aerith and Tifa will be 39 and 37 respectively, with Cloud in the middle at 38. Final Fantasy VII is also one of the only entries to have a canonical date like this. Not only are they all Millennials, the heroes of the Resistance faction Avalanche that oppose Shinra Corps are an Antifa group of environmental activists. My gods, how woke. Am I in a rare form for this one? Maybe I want to watch the fires of the fandom engulf itself like the fires that burned down Cloud's hometown. Speaking of which, even I can admit there's something about malevolent silver-haired men that's really an aesthetic, and the game's villain Sephiroth is nothing if not iconic, from his outfit to his sword to his theme song, not to mention the 2-minute-long attack animation for his limit skill Supernova, where he literally knocks a meteor through the entire solar system just to blow up the sun. Can we get a little more extra with a side of brooding? Something that makes Sephiroth extra interesting, though, is where his name comes from. See, in the game, Sephiroth is only one of many similar-looking clones. Kind of like a Jango to Boba Fett thing for those Star Wars fans who understand there's always a Star Wars reference somewhere in Final Fantasy. And the reason why I bring that up is the reference to his name because Sephiroth comes from Sephiroth. The Sephiroth in Kabbalistic literature were known as the 10 stages of emanation. The term is plural for Sephira, which refers to the aspect of a godly creator. Sephira each had a rhythm that, when unfolded onto each other, came to represent the rhythm of creation itself. This was a highly disputed religious principle, both in the mystical nature and their direct function, but Kabbalists used them as one of their primary ways of contemplation in spite of their heretical nature. The individual Sephiroth are Keter Elyon, or the Supreme Crown, Halma, Wisdom, Bina, Intelligence, Hesed, Love, Gevura, Might, Tif, Eret, Beauty, Netzah, Eternity, Hod, Majesty, Yesod, Foundation, and Malkut, Kingship. The Sephiroth have also been called by other names, the most popular being crowns, attributes, principles, and steps. Though often arranged in triads to form a right, left, and middle pillar, sometimes different arrangements were also used. Whatever the arrangement, it's usually referred to as the Tree of Life, which becomes an important factor later. Alright, let me get down to basics. The story of Final Fantasy VII follows a mercenary named Cloud Strife who was apparently a member of Soldier, an elite team of warriors enhanced by the planetary energy known as Mako. Mako energy is said to not only increase a person's strength, durability, and skills dramatically, but can also make them capable of performing magic feats. This takes the form of a stone of concentrated Mako that comes to be known as materia. Materia in Final Fantasy VII replaces the Magicite system in Final Fantasy VI, but with one caveat. In Final Fantasy VI with Magicite, you could eventually learn to cast the magic within innately. With Final Fantasy VII, even if you max out the materia you're using, your skills and abilities change depending on what materia you actually have equipped. And this led to a more strategic approach in battles in Final Fantasy VII. On the other hand, older fans of the previous games were sometimes frustrated because constantly swapping materia led to unstable character builds and more of a grind when it comes to gameplay. But also, harvesting Mako for use with their soldiers, power systems, and materia is that it's akin to drilling for oil in the real world. Harvesting Mako damages the planet, and when human demand exceeds the natural process by which something is created, that's when you start seeing a massive environmental damage. Whether it's mining for things like coal or oil, or stripping forests for use in paper and wood production. We see Shinra's influence all over the planet as we go through the world of Final Fantasy VII, with only Cloud's team standing between us and the mutually assured destruction at the hands of Sephiroth, and the planet that's desperately trying to fight back. At the center of this conflict is the city of Midgar, and is where the opening of Final Fantasy VII takes place. Cloud has joined Avalanche with Barrett Wallace, a former miner who lost his hand to Shinra, but had it replaced by a prosthetic hand that is also a gun. Black communities in the United States had a mixed reception over Barrett, with many seeing him as a shallow stereotype of an angry black man, while some also justifying his characterization because Barrett's anger comes from his mistreatment by Shinra, including the murder of his friend Dyne. This left Barrett as the sole person to care for Dyne's daughter, Marlene. So Barrett and Cloud team up to take down one of Shinra's Mako reactors with a massive explosion. After returning to their base, we meet up with the next member of Cloud's team, Tifa Lockhart. Tifa is a childhood friend of Cloud who comes from the same mountain village called Nibelheim. She joined Avalanche sometime before Cloud and is actually the person who suggested him to Barrett. Tifa and Cloud's relationship is also complex. While he did promise her that he would become a first-class soldier like his hero Sephiroth, he never actually got that far. To his shame, Cloud hid his face when he returned to Nibelheim behind a military helmet. It wasn't until Sephiroth went AWOL and began burning down the village that he finally revealed his identity and saved Tifa from Sephiroth. But then, why is Cloud dressed like a first-class soldier? Because there was another person in the village who was actually a first-class soldier. Someone I consider to be the actual hero of Final Fantasy VII, Zack Fair. Zack ticks all the boxes of a classic hero archetype. Classic heroes are commonly semi-divine or extraordinarily gifted. Aside from Sephiroth, Zack was one of the strongest heroes of his time. Zack is incredibly resourceful and skilled, but also foolhardy. He courts disaster and is even a bit childlike in his approach to danger. But just like a classic hero, Zack was a man who lived and died in pursuit of honor, an honor that led him to sacrifice himself to protect Cloud from Shinra troops. It was a glory he passed on in memory to Cloud, extending his own legacy in the only way he could. And that's when Cloud snapped. Literally. He had a total and complete nervous breakdown that led to a disassociative episode in which Cloud began to supplant all of his own memories of failure and uselessness with Zack's cool demeanor, calm brilliance, and efficiency. Like Puss in Boots, Cloud transcended the mask to become a hero, until he met Aerith. Aerith Gainsborough is the result of a human falling in love with an ancient race of magical beings called Cetra. Sort of a pre-generator race that lived on the planet before humans. Contrary to Terra, however, in Aerith's case, it was Ifalna, her mother, that was the last living relative of the ancient Cetra race. This bloodline gives Aerith a direct tie to the planet's lifestream, a supernatural force flowing beneath the surface, where all Mako energy comes from. A gestalt accumulation of life. As such, when people die, they join the lifestream as a part of it. Aerith can feel every time someone she knows dies and joins the lifestream, which is what brings me to my first real big theory about the original story of Final Fantasy VII. See, Aerith met Zack. In fact, Aerith and Zack were in a relationship While they had spent some considerable time separated by the time of his death, Aerith could still feel the moment Zack died and joined the livestream. But what does it have to do with Cloud? Well, following a second attack on the Mako reactors surrounding Midgar, Cloud and team were ambushed by the president of Shinra Corps himself, and after a fierce battle, Cloud fell from an overpass right through the roof of Aerith's church. This actually completely mimicked the way Aerith met Zack, which is a curious detail. But then there's the fact that Soldier is an extremely elite and tight-knit group. It's unlikely to think that any two first-class soldiers don't know of each other at least by name. Why is that important? Because Cloud shows up at Aerith's church wearing Zack's outfit, carrying Zack's sword, and claims he has absolutely no knowledge of who Zack is. Remember, he's currently suffering from a dissociative breakdown that has supplanted his own memories with Zack's memories. It's plausible this is a form of dissociative identity disorder. Dissociative identity disorder used to be called multiple personality disorder. It's categorized by someone who has dissociative episodes, usually resulting from some kind of trauma. These episodes mean that a person can switch into different mental states. If you've seen Moon Knight, it's the same concept. There are some other examples of dissociative identity disorder that are more popularly known, but what makes Moon Knight a much better example of these stories is that care was taken between Mark Spector and Steven to try and put a better understanding on did than M. Night Shyamalan letting James McAvoy play with his characterizations on screen. My theory here is that Aerith always knew Cloud was lying about Zack, but was unsure why, and wanted primarily to figure out what happened to her estranged lover. In that, did she develop feelings for Cloud? Hard to say. I don't consider it outside of the realm of possibility. That being said, I'm a hardcore Zack Aerith shipper, and I think Cloud fits way better with Tifa. So given this information, I want to ask again, which one of the twins is this again? But okay, you guys are itching for some mythology. I get it. Final Fantasy games are full of it, and this one's no different. Let's start with the city itself, Midgar. Midgar. So playing basically the first quarter of Final Fantasy VII was really rough for me, and would probably be difficult for anyone who'd seen Atonement before. I've gone off on rants about that place, but now that I'm thinking about it, and how to characterize the city for you guys to really envision it, Atonement and Midgar are extremely similar. Throw in a touch of Midnight City from Invincible, the Cursed Perpetual Darkness vibe. It's a handy thing where there's so many vampires and Fomorians running around. Midgar comes from Midgard, of Norse mythology. It means Middle Earth. I'm looking at you, Tolkien. It is the home of humans that was formed from the body of a giant called Ymir. According to the myth, the Aesir of Asgard slew Ymir and rolled his body into a ball at the center of the universe. They Katamari'd this man to create basically the Earth, according to Norse belief. His flesh became the land, and his blood became oceans. Bones turned into mountains, and hair became trees. His teeth are jagged cliffs. Lastly, Ymir's brains became the clouds, and his skull was held up by 4 dwarves named Nordri, Sudri, Austri, and Vestri, north, south, east, and west, respectively. With regards to location, Midgar is apparently situated halfway between Niflheim, the land of ice, to the north, Muspelheim, the land of fire, to the south. It is also connected to Asgard, the land of gods, by means of a rainbow bridge called the Bifrost. Now here's where I get to bring it back. The worlds of Norse mythology, of which there are 9, are aligned on a great world tree called Yggdrasil. There's a giant tree in Tirnanog too. It's always interesting when cultures cross like this. That's comparative mythology, a concept our story is all about. It doesn't stop there. One symbol that has become associated with Cloud is a symbol of the wolf. While some speculate that this has to do with his lone wolf persona, according to the Reunion Files, a book that is essentially the making of Final Fantasy VII's movie Advent Children, the wolf represents loneliness and guilt over the 2 deaths of his friends, Aerith and Zack. Yeah, in the story of Final Fantasy VII, in case you haven't heard already, Aerith dies. Of what though? I'm not going to get into it. TLDR, there's an online theory that suggests Aerith didn't die when Sephiroth stabbed her, but rather that she was paralyzed and slowly drowned after Cloud let her drift into the water. There's some medical reasons to suggest that, such as bodies typically float, but honestly, it's just too much to get into, and I'd rather talk more about the mythology because Norse mythology has a famous wolf, the child of Loki, named Fenrir. Yeah, Loki's kids are pretty weird. There's the giant wolf Fenrir, there's a giant snake that wraps around the whole world, Jormungandr, there's a six-legged horse, Sleipnir, and a half-woman, half-skeleton that serves as the North Pantheon's god of death, Hel, or Hela if you're Cate Blanchett. In Norse mythology, Fenrir represents the coming of an apocalyptic event known as Ragnarok, where he is prophesied to swallow the god Odin and utterly decimate humanity. Odin is a representation of order, where Fenrir is a representation of chaos. In Ragnarok, following Odin's demise, his son named Vidar, the god of vengeance, holds down Fenrir's jaw with his foot and uses his hands and his sword, splits the giant wolf's jaws open wide. In this way, for Cloud, Fenrir represents his ordeals through surviving chaos. In his story, Cloud sees himself as Fenrir, a force of chaos and destruction too dangerous or unpredictable to be around people. In fact, following Ragnarok, the rebirth of the world, another popular phrase in Final Fantasy VII story, Vidar would come to live where the city of Asgard had previously been. This in many ways mirrors Midgard's partial destruction through the fall of Shinrakor at the end of the first installment of Final Fantasy VII. The more I think about it, the more I realize Squaresoft really outdid themselves with the story here. There are so many details, so many intricate layers, and it makes you wonder why wasn't more of it expounded on in the actual game. You know, the one that came out on the PS1 in 1997. Believe it or not, the game was actually horribly rushed. See, Final Fantasy VII was originally supposed to be released on the Nintendo 64, not the PlayStation. Up until this point, Square had a long-standing deal with Nintendo. All their previous games had been released on console, but the problem came with Nintendo's commitment to using cartridges over discs. In the late 90s, a shift in technology brought compact discs to gaming. Conversely, with the storage capacity of the cartridge, discs could actually fit a lot more. This was something we learned about years ago when the game's designer, Hironobu Sakaguchi, was asked. He said their choice between the PlayStation CD-ROM or the N64's cartridges. The decision was to go with Sony's system because only the greater storage space of the CD-ROM would be possible to bring Final Fantasy VII's 3D characters and FMV cutscenes to life. Another problem became the cost. If they used cartridges, which they would have had to use multiple, the game would have released at over $60 for a price tag. Wow, just think about how normal that price is today. I guess if Final Fantasy VII were being made now, it is. Well, the remake is. That's what these outfits are based on, since I'm sure you guys notice how Blair is way more covered up than the original Tifa designs. Because Cloud has an iconic motorcycle, I wanted to do something with his bike in this picture. I'm not used to coloring machines, so it was a good challenge. I happened to find this video of a Xenomorph bike that inspired me and tried to go from there. Let me know how you think it turned out. The design of the bike we let our artist have a little bit of creative freedom with, but ultimately, through the colors that I used, it's based on our dragon character Dratheris, or Dragonus if you prefer. For the background, I thought about it a lot. I didn't want to just stick them in the middle of Midgar or something. And then it occurred to me. In Atonement, there's an abandoned freeway, in what I think is called the Milford District. It's somewhere close to the Cincinnati District and the Columbus District. This really fit the vibe of the dystopia of Final Fantasy VII, and is a place I've actually been to. It's creepy. Atonement is a city-state that sprang up sometime after the sickness of the 2020s, in what we used to call Ohio in the United States. It's a place filled with dark creatures and evildoers, vampires, demons, and just straight-up villains everywhere. For some reason, my sister likes taking us there. Believe it or not, for some reason, she can actually keep us safe. Someone told me once it's her pretty privilege, but I think there's more to it than that. Okay, we've come this far in, and if you thought for even a moment that I wouldn't mention Knights of the Round in a Tales of Atonement video about the mythology in Final Fantasy VII, well, where have you been? Go watch Martin and Madeline present King Arthur with Excalibur in the Ride of the Puka. Or we have them reciting the poem of Lady Shalott. Arthurian lore has been an important part of Tales of Atonement stories since its inception. Stories about King Arthur is what fuels Martin's warrior spirit. But what or who are the Knights of the Round? In the game, Knights of the Round is hands down the hardest summoning spell to obtain and requires a ton of in-game stuff like chocobo racing that I won't get into. This isn't a strategy guide. When you use the Knights of the Round materia, your enemies are inundated with attacks from 13 warriors, 12 summoned knights, with the final strike being delivered by King Arthur and Excalibur. The exact identity of these knights, with the exception of King Arthur, isn't listed anywhere in any of the Final Fantasy VII media, but we do have a best guess. The 13 knights most commonly associated with the Knights of the Round Table are as follows. Sir Percival, first mentioned by the French author Trien de Troyes in The Tale of Percival, the Story of the Grail. He's best known for being the original hero in the Quest for the Grail, before being replaced in later literature by Galahad. Sir Tristan. In legend, he is tasked with escorting the Irish princess Iseult to wed Tristan's uncle, King Mark of Cornwall. Tristan and Iseult accidentally drink a love potion during the journey and fall in love, beginning an adulterous relationship that eventually leads to Tristan's banishment and death. The character's first recorded appearance is in retellings of British mythology from the 12th century by Thomas of Britain and Gottfried von Strasbourg, and later in the prose Tristan. He is featured in Arthurian legends, including the seminal text Le Morte d'Arthur, as a skilled knight and a friend of Lancelot. Sir Lamorak. Lamorak is one of the sons of King Pellinore and the brother of Algovale, Drian, and Percival, and Tor. His siblings may also include the Grail maiden Dindrain and others. Named after his uncle, who in his time had been one of the best knights of King Arthur's father, Uther Pendragon, he gains fame for his strength, fiery temper, and feats of martial prowess, such as fighting off at least 30 knights by himself on more than one occasion. Lamorak's adventures often involve the Cornish prince Tristan, first his mortal enemy, later turned into his best friend. Sir Bor. Sir Bor and Lionel live for several years at Clauda's court, but they eventually rebel against him and even slay his cruel son Doran. Before Claudas can retaliate, the boys are rescued by a servant of the Lady of the Lake and are spirited off to be raised with their cousin Lancelot. They all grow up to be excellent knights and go to Camelot to join King Arthur's retinue. Bors is recognizable by his distinctive scar on his forehead, and participates in most of King Arthur's conflicts, including the eventual battle with Claudas, which liberates his father's land. Bors fathers Ilion the White, when the beautiful daughter of King Bandagors, Claire, tricks him into sleeping with her by way of a magic ring. He later introduces his son to the Round Table. Sir Galahad. He is the illegitimate son of Sir Lancelot du Lac and Lady Elaine of Corbenic, and is renowned for his gallantry and purity as the most perfect of all knights. Emerging quite late in medieval Arthurian tradition, Sir Galahad first appears in the Lancelot Grail cycle, and his story is taken up in later works, such as the Pulse Vulgate cycle and Sir Thomas Malory's La Morte d'Arthur. In Arthurian literature, he replaced Percival as the hero in the quest for the Holy Grail. Sir Kay, any Disney fan knows this one, is King Arthur's foster brother and later seneschal, as well as one of the first knights of the Round Table. In later literature, he is known for his acid tongue and bullying, boorish behavior, but in earlier accounts he was one of Arthur's premier warriors. Along with Bedivere, with whom he frequently associated, Kay is one of the earliest characters associated with Arthur. Kay's father is called Ector in later literature, but in Welsh accounts name him as Sinir Senefog. Sir Bedivere is one of the earliest characters to be featured in a legend of King Arthur. Originally described in several Welsh texts as the one-handed great warrior named Bedwyr Bedriant, Arthurian chivalric romances inspired by his portrayal in the chronicle Historia Regum Britanniae portray Bedivere as a knight of the Round Table of King Arthur, who serves as Arthur's marshal and is frequently associated with his brother Lucan and his cousin Griflet, as well as with Kay. In the English versions, Bedivere notably assumes Griflet's former role from French romances as the one who eventually returns Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake after Arthur's last battle. Sir Garrus. Garrus is described as valiant, agile, and handsome, even as his right arm was longer than his left, but reticent in speech and prone to excess when angered. As such, he was the least well-spoken of all his peers. Nevertheless, it tells of how the nobles of the kingdom of Orkney, which his father King Lot had ruled when he was alive, attempt to have the kingdom given to Garrus, whom they thought better fitted to be their king than any of his brothers. Garrus, however, refused to be crowned until at least after the end of the quest of the Holy Grail. The prose Merlin describes him as the best warrior among Gawain's brothers, as well as the least equal to Gawain himself. Sir Gareth. The earliest role of Gareth, appearing as Gurrit, is found in the first continuation of Trien de Troyes' Percival and the Quest for the Grail. In the original Percival, Trian himself had only mentioned Gawain's brother named Agrivian, Garez, and Gurris. As the protagonist of the story's final episode, he slays the giant known as the Little Knight, thus avenging the death of fairy king Bragomir, son of Guinevere, and the Fae Bragenpart. Good grief, some of these names. Several of his adventures are narrated in the Vulgate cycle. That's the Lancelot Grail cycle. In the Vulgate, Merlin, Gareth, and his brothers defect from their father King Lot and take service with King Arthur, participating in the early battles against the Saxon invaders of Britain and in the war against King Claudius on their continent. As the youngest and often most chivalrous of the Orkney princes, Gareth later prevents his brothers Gawain and Agravain from killing their older sibling Gareth in revenge for the murder of their mother, the Queen of Orkney, condemns his brothers to their killing of Lamorak, and attempts to dissuade Agravain and Mordred, the youngest of Orkney's brothers, from exposing the secret love affair between Lancelot and Arthur's wife, Queen Guinevere. It's also thought that Gareth and Garrus aren't actually brothers, but actually the result of splitting one original character into two. Now that makes sense, given their names are so painfully similar. Sir Geraint, oh my goodness, was the eldest son of King Erbin and Damonia, and was a knight of Devonshire. After the death of his wife, Prince Geraint spent much of his time at King Arthur's court looking for action and adventure. It was during this period that he encountered the Sparrow Hawk Knight, and came to marry Lady Enid of Cardiff. Their story is told in the ancient tales of Eric and Enid, and in Geraint Mab Enid. He restored Sir Yunel all of his possessions and then married his beautiful daughter, Lady Enid. At one point, Geraint heard Enid complain that he was a lazy knight. He was so embarrassed he accused Enid of cheating on him. To ease his conscience, Geraint took Enid on a journey through a series of trials until she convinced him of her faithfulness to him. Enid remained so devoted to Sir Geraint that ultimately they returned home and lived in happiness for the remainder of their lives. So what you mean is she accused him of being lazy, and then he trauma bonded her to him in order to dissuade any further dissent. Wonderful. So chivalrous. Sir Gawain was originally said to be the nephew of King Arthur. Gawain's parents were King Lot of Orkney and Morgau. Although his mother is said to be Anna in Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain. Upon the death of King Lot, Gawain became head of the Orkney clan, which is included in many sources his brothers Agravain, Garrus, and Gareth, and his half-brother Mordred. Though Lancelot is often referred to as the greatest knight, Gawain is also referred to as the greatest knight of the Round Table on occasion, and is most recognized from Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It seemed to be common knowledge that Sir Gawain was also the most trusted friend of Sir Lancelot, and in some legends seems to be the rightful heir to the throne of Camelot once King Arthur passes. Sir Lancelot du Lac was the son of King Ban of Benwick and Queen Elaine. Lancelot was the first knight of the Round Table, and he never failed in gentleness, courtesy, or courage. In addition to his courage and prowess in the battlefield, Lancelot was also a knight who was consistently serving others, thus giving him a good name and favor among most circles. It has been said that Lancelot was the greatest fighter and swordsman of all the knights of the Round Table, and yet he was also extremely intelligent and known for his charm and humor. Legend tells us that as a child, Lancelot was left by the shore of the lake, where he was found by Vivian, the Lady of the Lake, caring for him as her own. Vivian fostered and raised Lancelot, raising one of history's greatest knights. And the king himself being the last knight on the list. King Arthur, often overlooked because of his role as a king, husband, and epic legend, is the knight Arthur himself. The ruler of the land, and yet the head of the Round Table, the first knight among equals. The name Arthur is almost certainly a derivative of the name Arcturus, a Roman name, but according to J.D. Bruce, it possibly came from the name Arturs Viros, bear man, which is from Celtic origin. Bruce also suggests the possibility of a connection with Irish art. King Arthur was the son of Uther Pendragon, and according to many legends, defeated the barbarians in dozens of battles. Subsequently, he conquered a wide empire and eventually went to war with the Romans. He returned home on learning that his nephew Mordred had raised a standard of rebellion to take Guinevere, the queen. At her landing, his final battle took place. Now again, I'm not sure that's the proper order, and these are only the most known 13 knights. There are so many characters that have been adapted, added, changed. So if you have a different idea of who the knights are, or which ones they represent, let me know in the comments down below. And let me know if you'd like me to do a standalone video on the Knights of the Round Table at a later date. In the meantime, get ready for probably one of the most conscientious projects yet, next week with Final Fantasy VIII. Art for this week was by Pendragon. Whoa, there's no way. So, Kyo Pendragon on Fiverr, a skilled illustrator, designer, and pencil storyteller. They love engaging their audience with shapes, color, and composition. And you know what? Between this one and the Final Fantasy IV designs, I really am a big fan of their work. Click the link down in the description. If you've got a story to tell, Kyo's pen can help you tell it. Art for this channel wouldn't even be possible, however, without the help of our patrons. Monetization on YouTube is not enough to keep us going, so please follow the Patreon link down in the description to help Tales of Atonement keep going long term. We have a lot left to do and a big story to tell, and we simply can't do it without your help. Besides, there's a ton of extras only available on Patreon that won't be available for months on YouTube, if ever. Some of our great patrons include Pammy Poo, Shadow Fox, Arya Gamari, Charles Tam, Jace Moreland, and Lunder Lumen. Thank you all for watching and supporting our story.